Hi, Greg Scala here from Scala Guitars. I've had some interest in my shop-made carving duplicator, and I thought I'd just give you a quick video tour. Here is the machine. It's very similar to a Gemini carving duplicator with a few of my own modifications. This enables me to rough carve an archtop top or back in about 30 to 40 minutes, which saves me a couple of hours of rough work. Of course, I do the final shaping with spoke shaves, scrapers, that sort of thing. The machine consists basically of three parts. There's a base, a carriage assembly, and a dust collection system. The base is made out of 2 layers of 3/4 inch plywood, and onto that I've mounted 2 rails. These rails are fixed along their length to the 2 layers of plywood, and I chose this type of rail system so that it would provide some structural rigidity to the base. Onto that I've got a bearing to which I bolted a piece of aluminum, to which I bolted shaft supports, which are also made out of aluminum. I drilled and tapped all of these, and it holds together quite securely. Between the 2 shaft supports is a hardened steel shaft, and they engage to the bottom part of the carriage assembly. This machine has 3 degrees of movement. This allows me to move things up and down, back and forth, and side to side. Underneath the carriage assembly, I've got 2 bronze pillow block bearings, which are then bolted to the carriage assembly, which I welded out of steel. There's a square tubular steel here, onto which I welded some ends just for support. There's a piece of steel tube here, inside of which is a metal shaft. I've drilled a hole in the shaft and put a little split in the end of the shaft here. And onto that I mounted a piece of 1/4 inch drill rod. I cut some threads and mounted a ball that you'd normally use for a jig handle. I got that from Lee Valley Tools. If I adjust this screw here, loosen it up, I can slide this piece up and down, which is useful for zeroing the machine and making adjustments, and I'll show that to you a little bit later. At this end, I've just got a piece of steel, square steel, and I've got this beam that comes across between the 2 pieces that just helps to give it some support. At the end of this piece, you can see a metal plate, and onto that metal plate I've got a couple of U-bolts here, and that's what holds the router in place, and I'll show you a little bit about that in a moment. This carriage assembly pivots on this pillow block bearing underneath, and that bearing also allows the entire assembly to slide back and forth. Now you can imagine this assembly is a little bit heavy, and I was a little bit worried that it might bow down into the pieces that I'm cutting, and so I put a metal shaft here that comes off the back end, and I put some counterweights on it. And when I do that, you can see that it takes very little for me to lift up the assembly and drop it down, and so it really doesn't bear down into the wood project that I'm working on. The other thing that I did was I actually mounted this on a hinge. And if I back up here a little bit, you can see that this whole assembly, this carriage assembly, will actually slide off the end of these rails. I can take that thing, hang it up on the wall, and it gets out of the way. And in order to make the base more portable, I added a couple of little wheels there. And so I can take this thing, wheel it to a part of my shop that I'm not using, lean it up against the wall, and so that when this thing is in use, it hardly takes up any room in my shop whatsoever. Now the router is just I think a 1 3/4 horsepower Porter cable router, and you can see when I go underneath it there that I've got a router bit, and that's 1 inch in diameter, just like the plastic ball on the stylus. And I've got a piece of plywood there, and you can see the hole in it that leads up into the dust collection system. And around the plywood I've screwed on a 3 inch door sweep And I've got this collar here which attaches to my dust collection system, and I've left all the dust around the machine here to show you that after making 3.5 tops and backs, that's all of the dust that did not escape the dust collection system. So I think this thing's probably picking up about 90%, 95% of the dust, and it really makes for a nice work environment. One note about using the machine is I do wear hearing protection. It's quite loud when it's in use. One other thing that I did was I added on, this is basically a bicycle brake that I got from a scavenged bicycle, and if we follow the cable over, you can see here that it's attached to the end of this bearing assembly, and when I squeeze the handle on the bicycle brake, it operates that brake. What that does is when I'm sliding this thing back and forth over the wood, because the bit is grabbing into the wood, it kind of wants to wander a little bit as I'm moving it back and forth. When I grab the handle, it locks that end in and allows me to go straight across and straight back. I release it and move it over a little bit. I lock it again, straight across and straight back. While I'm mentioning that, I should also say that the proper way to use this machine is to start up at the neck end and push it to lock it in place and push it through the wood. Bring it back along the same course, and I'll exaggerate here for clarity. You slide it over, lock it, and then push it again. If you're at this end and you run it into the wood like that, because of the direction that the router bit is turning, it's going to want to pull this machine very fast towards you, and that's unsafe, and it also doesn't provide for a very good cut. So you must always push it through, bring it back along the same track, move it over, and push it through again. When I want to zero the machine, I take this machine out 3 or 4 times a year. I want to make sure that the router bit is relatively at the same height as the ball at the end of the stylus. So what I do is I loosen this bolt here, I pull the stylus up, I bottom out the router bit on the piece of wood on that side, and then all I have to do is drop this down. It drops down onto there. I tighten that up, and this is therefore exactly in the same spot relative to the tip of the router bit. And I can also use it to fine-tune things as well. Let's say I want to carve a thicker router top. Well, what I do basically is I can loosen this up, slide the carriage assembly up, lifting the router bit up a little bit, tighten this again, and the router bit will be that much higher than the tip of that. So if I want to carve a thicker top for some reason, I can do that. And I can do the opposite if I want to carve a thinner top. What I do use to carve these are hand-carved templates. I've made these out of basically quarter sawn oak. They're quite strong. I've hand-carved them, and they're quite durable, and I use these to make copies out of the wood that I'm making the guitar out of. I'll show you also the slight scalloped pattern that it leaves. Each of these grooves is where the router bit travels back and forth, and I can make as many grooves or as few grooves as I want, depending on how far along I slide the machine with each pass. I found that there, for example, running along at 1/8 inch leaves twice as many grooves, but they're not that much different in terms of their sizes of the peaks. So I run it at about 1/4 inch intervals, and then I get to work with some hand planes and scrapers and spoke shaves and whatnot, and I can smooth that out very, very quickly. And it provides for a very nice, accurate reproduction of the handmade template that I've made. Don't think I have anything else to say about the machine. It's worth building for me because I build a lot of guitars. There's some people that comment that maybe this isn't the purest way to make an arch top. All the manufacturers, the big manufacturers now, are using either CNC or machines like this, and it really is only used for me to hog off excess wood, and I do the final work by hand, which is where I think the artistry comes into it. And so for me, it's been worth building. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Once again, my name is Greg Scala of Della Scala Guitars. If you have any questions, I'll leave my email address on the video posting. Please don't hesitate to give me a call or send me an email. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Have a great day. Bye-bye.